Alright guys, how are we doing today? I hope you're all doing very well. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the white working classes in the UK specifically, because I believe that they've essentially been treated as collateral damage for at least probably a good 30, 40 years, if not longer than that actually. And I wanted to go through a couple of factors and reasons why I believe that is. I think the first thing to say really here is that England has had a very long history of class divide. In terms of wealth, just overall affluence, really, education, I'd say sort of prosperity, and just in sort of civic prosperity, I suppose. Although obviously with the Industrial Revolution, a lot of towns and cities prospered fairly well, I suppose, for a period of time, and a lot of the main aspects of our towns and cities really were built during the Industrial Revolution, and there was a lot of wealth there for a period of time, but unfortunately that kind of got sabotaged, I think, to some extent, by wealthy people who wanted a piece of the pie, so to speak. And while of course a lot of local individuals in those towns and cities, got rich, and did very well for themselves and made a name for themselves in terms of building, let's say, city halls, churches, government buildings and things like that, schools, hospitals, etc., monuments, parks, etc. I think a lot of it, certainly in terms of like a lot of the overall wealth of a lot of working class cities and towns, in my opinion, was to some extent sabotaged, I believe, by, mostly sort of like well-to-do middle-class types that kind of came in, I'd say, probably sometime within the sort of 1960s, and to the 1980s, early 1990s, I guess, as well, that essentially sold off what remained of those places. Partly because Thatcherism had kind of done serious damage to those local economies and industries, but because there was clearly money to be made in it, and so a lot of those there was still money to be made by selling it off and by moving things globally. So, like in the city that I was born in, for example, the city was very well known for shipbuilding. It was known for whaling for a period of time, which in the 1800s was very well. It was known for oil production and obviously meat as well, fishing, of course. And a lot of manufacturing, a lot of industry during the mid 20th century, sort of mid to late 20th century. And unfortunately, a lot of those jobs, a lot of those industries declined massively from the 1970s and certainly from the 1980s, to the point where essentially now there's really very little of those things left, if anything at all, in terms of some industries. And that's a real shame. That is a real shame, because those towns and cities relied on those industries for much of their wealth, really. And communities were built out of them. There was a real culture out of them, I suppose, as well, in some ways. Entire generations of families were involved in certain manufacturing industries. And his sort of more traditional ways of life, I guess, that were essentially kind of born out of the Industrial Revolution to a certain extent, and they certainly became more profitable, let's say, during that time, thanks to industry. So I think that a lot of these, what are now deindustrialized towns and cities, have been deliberately hollowed out, been deliberately stripped out of the things that made them their own sort of self-reliant places, really. And unfortunately, a lot of that foundation that was needed has gone, and it's gone. A lot of it's gone abroad. A lot of it's gone to places around the world where you can do things a lot cheaper, and you can kind of cut corners, and you can get away with certain violations because there's a lack of employment rights, lack of employment law, or certainly not to the standards that that would be acceptable in the UK. And again, Thatcherism is, I think, to a certain degree, part to blame for that, really. You could argue that there has been far too much regulation, and health and safety is certainly a major factor in this as well. Ironically, because it became too excessively bureaucratic and excessively it just kind of strangled a lot of things, and I think that is also part of the problem. And probably, as much as I hate to say it as well, probably unions probably to some extent didn't help themselves, asking far too much. And I mean, obviously I wasn't there during the 70s and 80s, but that's my guess, is probably that it just became a struggle, clearly a battle of power, really, a battle of leverage. And I think the unions kind of pushed the luck a bit too much. And we're trying to get everything their own way, and obviously that didn't pan out well for them. So I think if we're gonna have this conversation, we must have an honest one about it. And I also just think that, just in general, the economy of the 1970s, as we all know, wasn't brilliant. There were a lot of essential services being cut back then. There was inflation, and the economy wasn't in a great place in the UK. Certainly not in parts of Northern England, anyway. From what my parents have told me over the years, growing up in that time, having been born in the 1960s. So it's clear that there were a lot of factors going on here. And I don't think this was some. I'm not saying that this was in any way some kind of grand conspiracy to obliterate the working classes or anything, but I definitely think there's been, I believe, a kind of systematic, progressive movement. Whether it was intentional or not, I don't know. Part of me thinks it may have been, but I don't really know for sure. But there's part of me that thinks, it may have been intentional to try and weaken the sort of stronghold of the working classes, and to kind of prep them for, a kind of a post sort of traditional world, if you like, with liberalism and globalism, and the sort of the modernization of traditional working class environments. So yeah, I definitely think that deindustrialization was massively demoralizing and very disruptive to communities, to ways of life, just a general sense of belonging, purpose. And I think that when a lot of that went, it created, I believe, a kind of, I think it kind of created a kind of a sort of stigmatization that I believe the kind of media kind of latched onto and exploited, and political parties since Thatcher, I believe, have kind of dug into and tried to they've tried to kind of paint the working classes out to be some kind of serious sort of leech on the system or something, that they are the problem of the, they are the major problem of they are the barrier to modernization. They are the barrier to liberal values, liberal attitudes, and therefore we must weaken them. And I'll get into what I mean by that in a second. I think what's essentially happened here, in my opinion anyway, is that since, given, as I mentioned before, there's already been a major issue of classism in the UK for a very long time, long before Thatcher came along. I think there's always kind of been this this attitude that the kind of working classes should be given scraps, that they should be seen as something to acknowledge, but something not to really respect, and not to be given any kind of leeway, given any kind of potential power, any real potential leverage in society, lest they rise up and start calling for more powers that kind of and have more control and say in society, more than the middle classes or the upper classes. So I think there is this kind of, it seems to me at least that there's been a kind of through various policy changes, attitudes over the decades, there's been this sort of general sense that the working classes are to kind of be kept sort of at arm's length, really, sort of in the picture but not really, and not to kind of prevent them from having any kind of mechanisms to change anything, to prevent them from having any real say or any real power in terms of politics, in terms of like cultural direction, in terms of preventing the sort of ideals of liberalism. And I think that's been, really probably 40, 50 year process, really, that's gradually become, I believe, sort of more and more radical. And as I've mentioned many times on this channel about left-wing radicalized politics, radical progressivism is, I believe, a major part of that. And that I believe part of this push to kind of keep the working classes in step, if you like, sort of to keep them in control, partly I believe was the introduction of the welfare system. because I think without that, a lot of those, well, first of all, a lot of those communities would have become very dangerous places. So I think that the welfare state really acted as a kind of, admittedly very poor, but a kind of sort of a mitigation structure, if you like, given deindustrialisation or the threats of it, and because obviously it wasn't a good look to leave entire communities with no money whatsoever, and that, the reason I'm saying this is because I do think that, you know, without that, you know, we can all sit here and bicker about, you know, the ills of the welfare state, and there are many. But I think without that, really, there would really be very little means for a lot of people in those places to really survive, basically, because, and certainly now. And so I do think that the welfare system was made a played role in that, but of course the handling of benefits has been absolutely disastrous. And as I've advocated for a few times on my channel now, I think what we need to do really is to move away from that. We must move towards a skills training and education system, not a welfare system, because I think what we need to do is to give people a sense of empowerment, give people a sense of purpose, give people a reason to get up in the morning, and to give them some morale, you know, to give them some confidence that they can achieve something, that they can be something. Because I think there's a lot of negative press, there's a lot of negative connotations associated with people that live in places where I come from, which I think is very sad and completely unfair, unnecessary. Just this sort of decades-long stigmatization of the working classes as being all poor and lazy and lacking in motivation, lacking in ambition, etc., which I think is just pure ignorance. And again, just a sort of pervasive attitude of sort of division based on class in the UK, and that's something that I don't miss about living in the UK, honestly. It's one of the things that I despise about the place. Everyone is expected to kind of know their place, and just very outdated beliefs and attitudes and stigmatization towards not just people that are unemployed, but I just think in general, people that live in working class towns and communities. And I think a lot of these attitudes are perpetuated by mostly middle class and upper class types. And I think one thing that's kind of like really pisses me off is when you've got the likes of GB News, TalkTV, and just kind of in general, sort of the mainstream media. Really, there's an element of them that they try to kind of come across as if they're advocating for the rights and empowerment of the working classes, and yet these are the same institutions, if you like, that or people within them, specific people within them, that have perpetuated these notions of the underclass and like just negative attitudes, just negativity, and just sort of just picking out all the negative headlines about this place because it makes good news, I guess. It sells because that negativity sells. And so you've now got people like, Jeremy Carlin, Jeremy Kyle working for TalkTV. Sort of like, and this whole attitude as well. This whole attitude of, alarm clock Britain, the working man, the normal man on the street. This attitude of like categorizing people and like sort of like punching down in some sort of passive aggressive sort of subtle way, like trying to dress it up like, we stand for the underdog, we stand for the normal person. No, you don't. No, you don't. You just realise that this sells and people are desperate to be heard and people need someone to talk to, and you're just exploiting that. So don't give me that fucking bullshit. These people, they're just vultures. They really are vultures. And I think, honestly, having given it some thought, I don't really honestly think there's anybody that really has the working classes back in the UK politically, in my opinion. I really don't. I don't think there is. Certainly Labour doesn't anymore. Reform UK, absolutely no chance. No chance. Restore Britain, I don't think so. Not really. I don't. I think they're mostly just going to be a kind of more radicalised version of Reform UK. Yeah, I suppose really the only party that maybe, to me, the only real parties that I think had any stood, really, really genuinely stood with the working classes, in my opinion. And people were going to say, well, they're just fringe parties, or like radical nutters on the right. But I genuinely believe that they, well, were in one instance and are in another, is really Anne Marie Waters is her now dissolved party for Britain. Probably Britain First, probably actually. Although you could, I'm not saying that I agree with. I'm not saying necessarily that I entirely like their approach, but I do think that they're probably the only ones that really have any real solidarity with the working classes. And as I've said, Anne Marie Waters now gone for Britain Party. And again, this is going to be a controversial opinion, but I do think that to some extent, Nick Griffin's BNP party might have been actually. But I think the problem with these parties is that often, because the authorities, the media, are so used to this kind of like centrist, dictated centrist kind of like ideology of like politics. Anything that goes beyond that, in their opinion, that's far right, that's fascism. And when in reality, I don't think it often is at all. I think it's just controversial, perhaps, probably, but fascist, I don't think so. I think that a lot of these types are basically just, they become scapegoated by people in their own parties, admittedly, that give them a bad reputation. Even though the party themselves might not necessarily be bad, but it's people within the parties that give and give in politics everything. Optics and image is reputation's everything. But I also think the media deliberately try to destroy or to threaten anything that sort of sits outside of the mainstream lib lab con tripopoly, if you like, whatever you want to call it. I really don't think that there's really any genuine, as far as I can tell at the moment, I don't really think there is any real party in the UK that supports the working classes anymore. I don't think there is. And I don't think there is any coming down the line either. Labour sold themselves out a long time ago for radical liberalism and globalisation. Reform UK is basically just going to be a kind of hardline conservative party. Restore Britain is just a bit more of a radical version of Reform UK. But as far as like actually any political party benefiting the working classes, can't see it. Can't see it. Unless Labour, of course, decides to go back to its roots, which, well, given the way Labour is at the moment, can't see it. And now we've got Andy Burnham shooting himself in the foot, basically saying that he's not really going to properly address the issues of illegal immigration in any real meaningful way. And now he's talking about potentially allowing some kind of bill to censor mainstream platforms against the threat of X. The guy's shooting himself in the foot before he's even got into office. So I can't see his. And as much as I think that there is definitely some justification and argument for devolution, but I don't think that his plans, radical devolution, I don't think that's going to work in any kind of. It's not going to happen in the remaining time that this party has left in power. That's for sure. I think eventually we do need to have more devolution to the north. I think that that's part of the problem, is that a lot of the power in the UK is in mostly around in and around London. So I don't think that I don't think that's the right way to. In my opinion, actually, I think we need to really. This is a bit of a caveat here. I think we do. First of all, we need to have a four-year single term for each government that gets into power. I also think we should have a mid-term accountability act in which the public gets to have a say 2 years into a government, in which they basically decide whether they want that government to continue. I've talked about this before, but I do think this is something that's definitely needed. I would put an outright ban on leadership changes for political parties as well. If a leader that took that government, that party into government at the general election, then walks away or is kicked out for some reason or other, then that automatically would trigger a general election. And I also think as well, maybe it's time to start having some very serious conversations about proportional representation as well. Maybe we do need to get away from this constant pendulum of political dominance between the Labour Party and the Conservatives. Maybe we need to have a system whereby essentially all parties are in power, various percentages, I guess. But I don't think the current system is fair. I don't think that democracy really. I think we live in a kind of performative democracy, and Brexit is perhaps is a really good example, because a lot of people were incredibly frustrated with the way that illegal immigration and immigration in general was becoming out of control, leading up to 2016. And I think people were tired of the bureaucratic sort of stranglehold of Britain in some senses by the EU. And just a kind of general sense that globalism wasn't benefiting a lot of working class areas. And I think that a lot of people who voted for Brexit wanted to get out of certain legislation within the European Union in order to try and attempt, I think, to try and gain back some kind of sense of economic empowerment. But of course, Brexit never really happened, did it? And the establishment certainly made sure of that. So I think we live in a deeply systematically classist, poisonous political system, an overall establishment that basically won't let you change anything unless it benefits them. And that's why I don't really think we live in a democracy, because we live in a system that says this is how it is, you will accept it, and will make it incredibly difficult for you to get anything through the House of Commons and House of Lords, If you want to bring forth any kind of policy changes or legislation that we disagree with, you're going to have a massive uphill battle to get it through, because it's a system that's protecting itself. It's a system that doesn't work, doesn't really benefit the average person up and down the country, not just in the north. In everywhere the United Kingdom, I don't think it really benefits most people. It's a deeply, I believe, corrupt system that is based on the globalist ideals. It's based on big banking interests, big corporate interests, lobby groups, and big donors. And so, so voting is kind of pointless, really, because, okay, you can have a vote, you get to vote for Labour, Conservatives, Liberal Democrats, probably Reform UK, will probably be the next government in power, God forbid, and whoever else beyond that, Greens, fuck me. But, in the end, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter because, okay, you're allowed to have a vote. Okay, big deal, whoopee-doo. Okay, what does that change, really? Because, as I said, if the system is that political entities just get into power and do whatever they want anyway, even though they've campaigned on a manifesto essentially promising to do certain things, and then they get into power and only listen to this essentially what our stakeholders, then what's the point in voting? What's the point? It doesn't make any difference, does it? So as far as I'm concerned, democracy doesn't mean anything. And I also think we need to. I also think we need to get rid of this monopoly of what seems to often be a kind of monopoly of councils, politically dominated councils, where it's where I came from. Usually, it's been that Labour have dominated over it, and I think we need to have more checks and balances. We need to have much more accountability at national level and regional level, local level politics, because I think things have got out of control. There's a complete lack of transparency, just seems to be a pervasive atmosphere of carelessness, of mismanagement of public funds, of budgets, and just an economy that just isn't working, a politics that just is a democracy, a supposed democracy that just isn't fit for purpose. It just doesn't work. It's not fair. It's not actually representative, I don't think. I think we really do need to move towards sort of more devolution-based politics, but probably not under Andy Burnham. But I think gradually over the coming decades, we do need to try and move toward getting more power and leverage, I think, in parts of the country outside of London. But how you achieve that, financially is I don't know. But you can't just expect everyone to just pay double, triple tax in order to do that. I don't think. I don't know. I think we do need to have. We do need to have a devolution. We need to have more. We need to have a future. We need to get those towns and cities I'm talking about. They need to have a future, and the way things are going, with more and more businesses closing, companies moving overseas, outsourcing, economic stagnation, I just don't see things getting better for a lot of those towns and cities, really. I really don't. Sure, there'll be tokenism here and there of some degree of investment, but it's never enough, and it won't really make any real difference to the average person's life, I don't think. So I do think that unless we start gaining some degree of power back from Parliament, from London, where it appears that most of the investment is, where most of the money is spent because of this economy of services, then I don't really know what hope there is for these towns and cities, because they're clearly not going to go back to the 1950s and 1960s, 1970s. So, we're going to have reinvestment. We're going to have regeneration. But I know that all costs money, obviously. So where that money is going to come from, I don't know. But clearly, it's we can't carry on the way we are. With the state in which these towns and cities are at the moment, that can't go on. And we're already in a kind of dangerous state anyway. Politically and economically speaking, things aren't helping right now. So we're really we are at a very potentially very dangerous point in history, I think, in many of these places, that I think people don't quite fully understand how bad it really is, and how bad it might get if we don't start to get real investment in jobs, in education, in housing, real housing, new infrastructure, transportation. It's we need to have a real hard think about what the future is for these places if that doesn't happen. Are we just going to leave these towns and cities to just continue to rot and just decay and just look like this behind me? Is that what they're going to be 20, 30 years from now? Is that what you're going to walk into? These formerly proud, very proud people of these towns and cities that fought and died, that worked incredibly hard to build these places, to contribute to their communities, to contribute to their cities, and felt a real sense of civic pride back in the day, unlike now. To be a part of something that they felt mattered, that was important, that gave something that gave them a reason to want to contribute, want to be a part of their society, their local economy. And that's gone, basically. It's not there anymore. And we definitely need to start bringing in green-based investment and creating, building factories. Building factories for solar panels, maybe for wind turbines. Harnessing probably the power of the North Sea, energy we could get from the North Sea, and obviously at the same time we do need to have a serious conversation about deep sea, oil, and harnessing the benefits of oil right in our backyard. So I think we need to have a mixture of the two, because I think temporarily for the next couple of decades, it's while we continue to advance green tech, it's beneficial for us for the time being, I think, to continue to use non-renewable energy sources to kind of, I guess, prop up the economy as well, for a short period of time, until we can get the kind of technology where we need it to be to start creating a lot more power through renewables. So in regards to the this kind of sense that the working classes have not only kind of just been left behind, but I think have been kind of forgotten for a very long time. I think a lot of it was very deliberate. I think it's just my gut instinct here. Could be wrong, but there is a part of me that thinks it was deliberate, because I think that there's been this kind of this very sort of long road towards weakening communities, weakening traditional values, weakening a sense of oneness, a sort of weakening a sense of shared sort of identity and culture, really. And I think a lot of that's been done through various mechanisms. I think it's been done through declining, maybe not all deliberately, but I think people have exploited a lot of things that have happened, with regards in terms of like the decline of the high street, sort of, a lack of trust in communities, a lack of trust on council estates, a decreasing sort of conservative, more sort of like more sort of tighter knit conservative kind of somewhat, let's say, traditional sort of family units and behaviours, let's say. I think that we've really moved from. I think that we tried to become. I think what happened here is that we overcompensated for the issues that to a certain degree, some element of the conservative nature of Britain during the 40s, 50s, 60s had. But I think what's happened is that those things, as I've said before, been taken over, and I think we've gone quite too far the other way. I really think that probably some of the best times, ironically, in England were probably where the 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s, maybe some of the 2000s as well. In some ways, but in other ways, they are the decades in which really a lot of the problems that we see today were starting to become apparent, really. Manufacturing declining, industry declining, communities being torn apart because of it, distrust, a sense of distrust in authorities and distrust in the government, a kind of middle class kind of like sort of dominating a lot of like what and exploiting what was left over in these towns and cities. The middle class kind of dominating institutions, the councils, the police, etc. And just a general sense that the working classes were something that could should be or could be treated as collateral damage, and should be if they are seen as some kind of threat to what is now hailed as some kind of heavenly state of progressive social and conservative attitudes and values in society. Because I think a lot of the establishment felt that the white working classes were somehow going to be some kind of hurdle to overcome, that they're going to be something that held the country back, that they were the very thing that essentially liberalism was fighting against. I believe anyway, and that's why I think that we often approached. We've had this decades long now, quite seriously radical, progressive series of progressive politics. And I think a lot of it started with Thatcher, but I think a lot of it really ramped up under Blair and Brown. And then we had all the austerity under the Conservatives that obviously caused another series of issues, economically speaking. where a lot of community spaces were had to close because they couldn't keep the doors open. It's too costly. So that's destroyed a sense of belonging as well. Libraries, cafes, spaces that people met up and and just new laws, police kind of like saying that you can't do this, you can't do that anymore, you can't do this, you can't do that there, you can't do this, you can't go here, you can't do that for this amount of time. Just an excessive overreach of just like policing, council authority, like rules. I think just a lot of things have just got. It's just a lot of what's happened to a lot of these towns and working class towns and cities is that there's been far too much legislation, far too much bureaucracy on top of political, ideological domination of those places. And then, of course, this perceived threat from a lot of those people that lived in those areas of a sense of that their sense of belonging to their places no longer had any relevance because now everybody else was moving in there from other parts of the world and will be essentially being treated as the new British. They are the new English, they are the new Scottish, Welsh, Irish, British. And that they somehow felt that, so a lot of these working class people felt like they'd been completely sidelined, that they'd been scapegoated in many ways. And I think they have been, actually. Media scapegoated them, stigmatised them for a very long time. Even this current Labour government's doing it. Has been doing it over the last 2 years. Again, with the usual buzzwords. Condemning them because they dare to have their own views. They dare to vote for Brexit. They dare to criticise the status quo. They dare to have any kind of analysis or criticism of anything that apparently they don't understand. Because we know better. We know better. We know what's good for you. So you need to put up and shut up. You're white working classes. You're nobody. You're not educated enough. You're not smart enough. You're not articulate enough. So you don't have any say. You have the wrong politics. You still cling on to outdated traditional ideals, and we don't want that in this hyper-liberal society. So therefore, you are the enemy. And with high unemployment as well, I think just a sense of, ultimately a sense of apathy, I think, is set in these places. And that's kind of served the establishment very well, actually. They want you to be like that. They want you to give up. They want you to give in. They want you to feel that you're being either underrepresented or not represented at all, that you are, to try and guilt trip you into kind of like submitting, to give up what you believe in, give up because you don't have the right attitudes, you don't have the right values, you don't have the right morals. Because only we get to decide that, because we're the authorities. We get to decide what you should be allowed to think or not think. We get to say what you can or can't say. We get to say what you should believe in, what you should stand for, what politics you should like. Because we're the authorities, and we are morally superior to you, and never forget that. That's basically the attitude, as far as I can tell. So where do we go from here? Where do we go when we've had decades of radical progressivism essentially becoming the new norm? This is England now. This is what Britain is now. How do you these places that aren't the bourgeoisie, aren't the champagne socialist types, aren't the people that live in nice parts of the country, wealthy, affluent areas that can't really afford to live in the ideals of utopian progressive politics, right? What about their realities? What about their lives? And that, and as you see right now with all of this condemnation of Andy Burnham, although some of it's perhaps to some degree justified with people criticising him for devolution. Everyone's coming out with the daggers and saying, well, all the wealth is in the south, so we shouldn't give any money to the north. Oh no, we don't give any powers to the north. Oh no, they're nobodies. They're nothing. They're the underclass. They don't matter in this economy. They're nobodies. They're nothing. They're just a bunch of losers on the dole. How do you turn that kind of shitty attitude around? This sense of us versus them, this black or white thinking, this utter diarrhea of fucking ignorance. Just this general, just poisonous attitude of classism. It's not just from authorities and government; it's from locals as well. It's from locals in the south, around London, in London, and actually even to some extent, even in some of these towns and cities, or rather on the outskirts of them, where people live in nicer, more affluent areas, in rural areas or whatever. So this is not just it's an inner class issue as well. I think there's a lot of insecurities and egotism involved. That's a kind of connected to classism, I think. And you've got the media that essentially have done nothing but chastise and just spent the last 20, 30 years basically slagging the working class. Well, long since Thatcher, really, since the 70s, since the 80s, the media has just latched onto this kind of like this bully boy sort of tactics, this kind of like deranged, toxic attitude of just undermining, undervaluing, underappreciating the working classes, just this sense of you don't matter anymore, you're not relevant anymore, you don't matter, so shut the fuck up, basically. And yet they forget that these are the places that built modern Britain. The people that are alive today, their grandparents, their great-grandparents, their great-great-great-grandparents, they built what is essentially, they built the main sort of infrastructure that we all sort of take for granted, really, or that we all, we're lucky to being a part of, or at least we benefited from in some way, and through successive generations. And I think it's deeply hurtful and deeply disrespectful to those places, to the people that built those places, and to the people that live in those places, that are real people, and that they're not just some statistic, that they're not just some stereotype thing that you portray them to be in your head. They're actually real people with real lives, with real problems, and a city and or a town that's struggling and has been for decades, while yours has done very well for itself. So how dare you have the audacity to sit there and criticise people that you don't know anything about, people's lives that you don't know, you haven't lived, you don't know anything about them. How dare you? Because quite frankly, it's a fucking disgusting attitude. And it's one of the things that I absolutely despise about the UK. This sense of, we don't give any money to those people. We don't talk about those people. They're not relevant. They live in the north. They live in the north of the country. The north. What? That's part of the UK, isn't it? I mean, we live in England, don't we? What's with all this attitude of oh well, that's the north. Yeah, it's called Northern England. Like Southern England is part of England as well. What's your point exactly? What's this constant attitude of division all the time? It's absolutely poisonous, and it's fucking everywhere in the UK. It's everywhere. It's in the media. It's in politics. It's in culture. It's in humour even. it's in entertainment, and I think that also, quite frankly, TV and entertainment have played a massive part in attitudes, negative attitudes, in division over the last few decades on TV and off it. Trying to kind of convince, trying to make it out that the white Brits are bad people, that they're all racist, and bigots, and fascists, and horrible people, nasty, ignorant, naive, horrible people, because they started making observations about their communities, and so that automatically apparently makes them bad people. What a shame. What a real shame. Telling these people, lumping them all together and saying, you are all full of hatred, basically. I mean, and then turning around and then getting pissy with these people when they dared to vote for Brexit, after you've just spent the last 30 years slagging them off, telling them they're all fascists and bigots and hypocrites and horrible, immoral people, lacking ethics, lacking morals, lacking an understanding of modern liberalism and why multiculturalism is a good thing for you. Essentially saying that you're not capable of understanding these platitudes, the importance of virtuism, the importance of hyperliberalism, because you're all too dumb to understand, because you live in the north, right? So you live in the north, so that automatically means you're less educated, you're less intelligent, you're less capable, you're not worthy of investment, you're not worthy of anything. You're the underclass, and don't you fucking forget it. That's essentially what's going on here. No one's going to say it outright like that, but that's basically what's happening, and what's been happening for a very, very long time. The media are guilty for it. The police are guilty for it. The councils are guilty for it. The education system's guilty for it. Civil service, the judiciary system. All right, they're all really to blame for this, I think. And then they come out of all this condemnation of these entire groups of people as one insult after the next, and then they complain about people voting for Reform UK, voting for Brexit, getting behind Rupert Lowe's Restore Britain. I mean, and yet we are supposed to be the idiots, right? Yeah, I wonder why that could be Sky News. I wonder why that could be BBC. I wonder what could possibly be causing this, The head scratcher. I don't know, maybe it's because you spent the last 30, 40 years condemning them all. Maybe that's it. Thinking that, maybe there's some hope on the horizon, because clearly the mainstream establishment, whether it's politics or the media or whatever it might be, don't care anymore. They stopped caring. They gave up on the working classes. They gave up on them. They said, you don't matter anymore. You've got nothing to give. Look at your towns and cities. They're all dumps. They're all dumps. And that whole attitude of the Chav thing as well, all that kind of shit that happened in the 90s and 2000s, this attitude of Chavism and the underclass. And I mean, that's nothing new. That's been going on since the 1800s, but this modernized just modernized modernized classism, really, putting everyone down. Well, those are towns and cities that are known for teenage pregnancies. Those are towns and cities that are known for high unemployment. Those are towns and cities that are known for people being on benefits for 30 years. We don't talk about them. We don't want to associate with those people. Oh no. No. We don't associate with people from Kingston upon Hull. Oh no. We don't do that. then they're not like us. They don't speak like us. They don't use the same vocabulary as us. They don't speak in the same articulate way as us. Oh no, we don't want anything with those people. No, we don't associate with the likes of them. And I'm just using my city as an example. There's countless places where I think that's happened. And that attitude, by the way, is pervasive in your local city councils and your police and your education system. Trust me. They'll tolerate you, but deep down, they fucking despise you. They resent you. They resent even after having to be around you. Look at them. Look at their teeth. Look at what they're wearing. Look, they don't dress like us. They don't have the same complexion as us. They don't shop at the same places as us. We're special. We're important. They're nobodies. Look at them shopping in Poundland over there. Look at them shopping in Aldi or Asda. We don't shop in those places. We're better than them. This kind of attitude, this kind of mentality is everything that is wrong with the United Kingdom. It is everything that is poisonous and dysfunctional and toxic, and it needs to go. This is everything that's wrong with that country, in my opinion. This is why the working classes were treated as collateral damage, because they were seen as less than. And they still are. So let's go through some major issues here, shall we? We've got stagnant wages. We've got housing basically being dilapidated. Councils don't have enough money to deal with council properties anymore. Inflation, right? Cost of living keeps going up. The economy doesn't seem to be going anywhere. It's stagnated. Seems to being got caught in a trap of complacency, stagnation for about 30 years now, probably, if not longer. As I said, most of the concentration of wealth in England specifically is mostly in the south. You've got councils working against their own people and the police, as I've talked about in other videos. Now you've got issues of the gig economy, lack of real work, meaningful work, dodgy, shady agencies and companies offering part-time or low-paid work, in which you have to basically have no choice but to top it with benefits to make it even worth your while bothering to take a job. And yet everyone gets deemed to be lazy and bone idle because they happen to rely on some kind of welfare to survive and to make it worth going to work. And then they wonder why people don't bother going to work. People don't want to work anymore. It's not because they're lazy. It's because they realise that it's a rigged system, and you've basically got no chance. And it's just not worth it, not worth the hassle. So unless Reform UK or Restore Britain or Labour, the Conservatives, or whoever the fuck else gets into power in the coming years, unless they're actually willing to admit that and actually do something realistically, something real and meaningful to deal with that, they've got no chance. And those towns and cities will continue to rot and become even more hollowed out. And eventually you'll see those places erupt into unrest. More and more insecure work, 0-hour contracts. The complete destruction of trade unions. And I'm not saying that they were ever perfect, but I do think we need to they are important. And I think that the kind of destruction or the sort of steady fraying of those things, the steady dissolving of those things has been massively detrimental to working class towns and cities. Not to mention all the sort of sense that a lot of these white working class communities have been treated as some kind of an enemy for decades now, to try and accommodate everybody else, right? But meanwhile, we treat these people as collateral in order to do that, and also say that if you disagree with what we're doing, you're the enemy, and we don't like you, and we'll make sure that your life is misery and difficult if you try to kind of influence anybody else in a way that we don't like, we don't agree with, by changing people's attitudes and perceptions about this thing that we've spent 40, 50, 60 odd years now trying to become the new normal, the hyper radical liberalism. Excessive government failings through Thatcherism, Labour in the 90s and 2000s, the austerity years under Blair and Osborne, the absolute failure under Johnson, Sunak, Theresa May, who, remember that strong and stable, remember all that crap? Yeah, really strong and stable. And now we've had this catastrophic Labour government, and where we're now apparently going to have Andy Burnham as PM, which will turn out to be, I'm sure, a clusterfuck and an absolute pack of essentially just a repackaged form of Starmerism, probably, of some sort. So I won't put too much hope in Andy Burnham, even though part of me kind of wants to give him the benefit of doubt, but I think, honestly, I've just become so sceptical and so cynical of politics now that I don't have any hope for Labour, and I don't have any hope for Reform UK, and anyone that thinks that Restore Britain is going to be some kind of whiting, some white, saviour political, messiah or something. I'm sorry, but you're being very delusional. As I said, the system itself is massively, massively broken. Politics doesn't work anymore. The system itself doesn't work because it's driven excessively by competition. Essentially, it's a capitalist political system, basically, that says, if you don't have enough money and you don't have enough leverage or support, forget it. And that's why so many parties don't get anywhere, because without the media on your side, without the financial support, you've got no chance. And it's also a system that breeds career politicians, because it's a system not about political doing things. It's a system that's not about actually doing anything good for people anymore. It's a system about gaining power and keeping power, and consolidating things. That's all it really is now. It's nothing to do with representation for the public and doing any kind of anything. It's not a system that's really conducive to any kind of moral or ethical goals, I don't think, anymore. It's just a system that protects itself, saves itself, and just breeds narcissism, egotism, cronyism, corruption, scandals, and they get away with it because the system doesn't have to be accountable. So it doesn't surprise me that it attracts certain types of people to it, which is another part of the problem. And the average white working class man and woman on the street don't really have any say, and that's deliberately designed like that. Deliberately designed so that you don't have any real ability. In theory, on paper, it looks like you do. You have some rights, you have some say, but in reality, forget it. Because most people aren't rich, and in these places, they're not well off. They don't have the means to protect themselves legally, and the system is essentially against you because it's meant to be. It's meant to be an imbalance of power, so that the system is always on top. It's always on top. It always has more leverage than you ever will, except a few exceptions, perhaps here and there, now and again. But generally speaking, it's a system that's not designed for you. It wasn't designed for you, and it never will be. Don't ever forget that. Decisions basically made by, wealthy, affluent people that have no relevance, have no understanding of what it is to live in these places I've been talking about throughout this video. People that couldn't care less, that walk away from these places even if they work in them, when the going gets tough, or when they've done enough damage that people despise them, or they've made enough money that they can afford to leaving behind a trail of damage. More and more centralisation of power in London hasn't helped things. Mostly economic power, I'd say. Financial power, because that's where most the major financial services are. Obviously, would be in the capital as well. What is it, like a few? I can't remember how many millions. I think, is it something like 5-6 million people live in London or something ridiculous? So I accept that it's a massive place, but I do think that there's a real issue with financial inequality in England. And it's really disastrous. It's been really, really disastrous for the places, the small towns and cities like where I grew up, because it's meant that they've had a bit of investment here and there, but only when it was absolutely necessary, or when people thought they could make some money out of it. But besides that, there's been no real serious investment in those towns and cities for the most part for decades, really. Sure, a bit of regeneration here and there, but no real meaningful investment that would really change those places around and give people a chance and hope again. And I don't see that coming down the line anytime soon, I'm sorry to say. Limited democratic means, limited democratic influence and pressure at a council level has not helped things. I just think just a general attitude of working class people being talked down to, being patronised and condescended to, as I've mentioned, stereotyped, stigmatised, just kind of belittled and talk. I think Nigel Farage said the little people, again with this kind of like categorization of people, this sort of not talking about people, talking down to people, the little, the normal, the average, by the people that supposedly were going to be representing these people when they get into power. Yeah, sure, Nigel, we all believe you. What was it now? We got like 3 houses or something. Barely even spend any time in the UK. We're mostly in America and traveling around the world. Yeah, of course you're gonna do what's right for those towns and cities, aren't you, Nigel? And Rupert Love, by the way. Yeah, because you really represent those average, normal people, don't you? Because what you really mean when you say that is relatively well off or relatively well-to-do business owners, who basically are the only people you really give a shit about, and everybody else can basically go fuck themselves, right? Yeah. We all know what you're about, Nigel. We all know what you're about, Rupert. All right? While I don't think that everything you say is wrong, while I don't think that everything you say I think that some of the things they say I agree with to a certain extent, but do I necessarily like the kind of rhetoric they use sometimes? No. Do I agree with all of their ideas, policies that they put forward? No. Well, certainly not everything, no. So, but this is more about like this sense, this false fake persona, or this sense that you're trying to come across as being some much needed voice for the underdog, for the underrepresented, or people that you feel that are somehow underdeveloped in some ways, and so therefore need to be controlled and managed carefully. And again, that's been going on for a very long time. Just a general sort of sense that these places are backwards and outdated and too traditional and too rigid and not modernised enough, not liberal enough. So we're going to force it on you. We're going to push it on you. You are going to accept immigration. You are going to accept LGBTQ+. You will accept liberalisation. You will accept it, or else. You will accept it. Or we will punish you through hate speech laws, through stigmatisation politics, and councils telling you that you can't fly your flags anymore, and you can't say this word, and you can't do that. And that basically multiculturalism is better than you. They've done more than you. They've achieved more than you. Well, yeah, of course they have, because they've had much more support than most of the white working classes have had for a very long time. And again, that was very deliberate. As I've mentioned, classism, class prejudice, a sense that working class people have been excessively judged and criticised and demonised for a very long time. And it really pisses me off, all of this stuff. And I'm sorry for swearing, but it's just there's no words for it, honestly. I don't even know how to describe how I feel about this kind of stuff. I just feel like disillusioned with everything at this point, I think. Politics, government, policing, local authorities, the things that are supposed to be there to help you, are supposed to represent you. I don't think they've represented the white working classes for about 50, 60 years. Journalism's basically just fucking diarrhea at this point. Media, they're just part of the culture war things, and as I mentioned with TalkTV and also GB News, the mainstream media is they're just a bunch of vultures just looking to exploit people and exploit situations for their own good, to make some nice little juicy story out of it. Keep the money coming in. They don't give a fuck about you, all right? They don't care. They don't give a shit about you or me. They do not give a fuck. Trust me. Anyone that thinks Talk TV or GB News or BBC or Sky News or all the rest of them, anyone that thinks that they care about you, I'm sorry, but you're in a state of denial. All right, you are living in a bubble of delusionment. Right? They don't care. They never have. They never have. You know what they care about? That's right, money. They care about making money and keeping it and making more and more of it. And if that means exploiting you or treating you as collateral to do that, or through political means or whatever else, they'll do it. You know why? Because a lot of those people that supposedly are advocates for the working classes, they're all scavengers and vultures, as far as that's the way I see them. They're all out to make a quick buck. Same with the people that sold out those towns and cities. They did the same thing. And anyone that's on your local news, they're no different. They don't really understand the real needs of people in the places that they supposedly represent, because they don't live there. They don't live there. You know where they live? They live in a nice little rural area. They don't care. They're not interested. They never were. They're just opportunists. Andy Burnham, opportunist. Nigel Farage, opportunist. Kemi Badenoch, opportunist. Rupert Lowe, opportunist. Zach Balansky, opportunist. Ed Davey, opportunist. All of them, they're all opportunists. You know why? Because they want the big seat. They want the big job. Media, opportunists. Councils, financial opportunists. Police, opportunists. Power mongering, control freaks. Looking to enact a bit of revenge. Because we all know what types of people the police attract. Or anyone with any kind of position of power. Sensationalism, right? That's what the media has been doing for the last few years now, really. And I'm sorry, but I just don't buy the whole thing with Talk TV and GB News. I don't buy it one bit. This just it's all divide and conquer. That's all it is. That's all this has been now for decades. Divide and conquer. Degrees of it. A spectrum of divide and conquer, if you will. Culture war politics, basically. getting people to say things that are controversial, getting people to, at each other's throats, creating an argument, creating division, sowing segregation on all sides, on the left and right, by the way. And meanwhile, treating the working classes as something to be exposed, to be treated as some kind of with suspicion, to be exploited, to be used, to be manipulated, to be lied to be conned by people who think that they don't have to be answerable to anybody, whether that's local politicians, the media, members of the council, councillors, etc. And then to complain when people get angry, when people after 30, 40 years of this shit rise up and say, we've had a fucking enough of this bullshit. We've had a fucking enough. We've had enough of the smearing, the slandering, the insults, the fucking patronising remarks, the condescending attitudes. And then the media and the politicians say, oh, well, we condemn violence. We condemn people being angry. We condemn this. We condemn that. Really? Do you? Or are you just saying that because that's what you feel like you have to say? Or are you just saying that because, again, it makes good news, right? Oh, the media are the good people. The media are they are morally bound people. They're the good ones. They're the good people. They do the right things. They're grounded. They're stable. Well, of course they are. When you're making, what is it, 70, 80, 90,000 £90,000 per year. When you live in a nice little affluent area in London or outside London or in some nice other affluent rural area in the country, right? Of course you're going to be. You're in a position where you don't have to fight and you don't have to rise up and take action and things into your own hands because you don't need to, because you don't live in the areas where these problems are, and you never will, because you've got a lot of money and you've been lucky. You grew up with good parents who gave a shit about you, who actually spent time trying to make sure that you had a good education, a good life. You were lucky. You grew up in an affluent area. You went to a good school, went to college, went to university, right? Probably got it all paid for, right? So you were lucky. But of course, you never mention that, do you? You never mention your wealth. You never mention your opportunities and advantages. Of course, you never mention any of that stuff. Or you say, well, yeah, but it's the reason a lot of people in the working class areas are poor is because they don't work hard. Well, no, it's because most of them didn't have the kind of opportunities that you fuckers had that, of course, you deliberately never mention. Because all you do is talk about hard work. When the reality is, it's not about hard work. It's about opportunities. It's about advantages. It is a tiny sliver of hard work. Yes, I accept that. But is it mostly about hard work? No, it's not. It never has been. And it never will be. Because you can work your ass off, but if you don't have the money, it doesn't matter how hard you work. You need money. Money is how things work. That's how society works. That's how you get on in life, with money. And if you don't have a lot of it, there's only so far you can go. And not everybody is super intelligent. Not everybody is well spoken. That's why most of the people you see in politics and media aren't your average working class man or woman, because apparently they're not good enough. That sends the wrong image. Anyway, I'm gonna end this video here in a second, but just mention a few more things that I think have gone wrong and have led to all of this gaseous and this environment in the real world and in the media, online, etc. Of course, wokeism, identity politics has absolutely destroyed a lot of things. Cancel culture, offence culture, if you like, all this crap. turning the white working classes against themselves. You know, the right wing kind of splitting apart now as well. Political tribalism, you know, the media going against anyone that doesn't support centrist parties. I just think in general, just an incredible amount of problems have happened here, and just trying to what's happened here is you've had the establishment, the elites of the media and the establishment, political establishment, institutions, etc., that have done their damn hardest. They've done their damn hardest to try and weaken, dismantle, and deliberately change working class towns and cities. I believe deliberately, through all sorts of different mechanisms, as some of them I've mentioned throughout this video. They've done it through mostly politics, through the economy, through changes in sort of societal and cultural changes to the actual environment, excessive laws, excessive rules, sort of diminishing communities because of it, or if it's in terms of like sort of like local sort of norms that used to be common, certain ideals, you know, certain values and things, certain ways of life that were crushed, that were deliberately destroyed or weakened. You know, sort of this marginalization of like these kind of what are deemed to be outdated traditional conservative values, working class conservative values, if you like, or you know, issues surrounding mental health, issues surrounding marriage, children, families, education. Now, I accept some of the problems have come from sort of outdated attitudes from probably Victorian Britain, probably in some of these working class areas. But I do think that there's a sense, I think, that the establishment, the media, want these places to kind of stay as they used to be, you know, rather than these places levelling up. You know, you heard that a lot during Boris Johnson's government. You know, we're levelling up. You know, these places are going to be levelled up. Did they? Don't look like it. So it's all about narrative framing. It's all about trying to convince the public that you're doing something rather than what you actually are doing. That's what politics has become. It's become more about image rather than substance. And that's not just at a national level, that's at a local level as well. And I think the policing, quite frankly, are a big part of that as well. In my view, is that the police are more about image protection, reputation protection now, than actual policing. So there's no wonders that there's so much resentment and bitterness in not only myself, but as you probably guessed throughout this video, but in many people that live in these places where they feel that they're not being represented or they're underrepresented, that they've been sort of sacrificed on the altar of liberalism, globalism, and they've just been deliberately left behind to sort of fend for themselves. And that's what's going on right now. Underfunded, undersupported, excessive austerity to transport, healthcare, education, etc. Just many problems that have allowed these places to become swallowed up, basically, and eaten alive by what I consider to be sort of piranha-like middle-class types, basically, opportunists that came in, took what they could get, then left. And I just think it's unforgivable, really. I don't think that, you know, some of these people that live in these areas I accept aren't exactly the most perhaps civilized or sophisticated compared to other parts of the country, but they're a very small, very small minority of people. The vast majority that live in working class towns and cities, and this is something you never hear, are decent people, are actually genuinely decent, nice people, or at least they're trying their best to be. But you never hear that. You never hear that. Very rarely do you hear the positives, the good things about these people, about their areas, the things that, the fact that these are usually kind and generous people that don't have a lot anywhere, and these are people who will talk to you, that they don't just live in. They're quite happy to talk. They're quite happy to talk about things with you. It's not like when you go to parts of London or other parts of the country where it's basically just like stone cold nothingness. It's just like everyone's just like, don't talk to me. We don't talk to people like you. We don't talk to people like you who have that kind of an accent, look that way, dressing in those kinds of that kind of attire. Oh, we don't associate with people like you. We're better than you. We're better than you. And I just think it's, just to kind of close here, I just think it's just a real shame. It's a real shame. Such disastrous attitudes have led to this. And I think really, in my opinion, and let me also add in terms of like who I also don't trust as well. I also don't trust the Lotus Eaters podcasters either. I want to make that clear. I think they're a bunch of well-off middle-class lads that essentially are doing right-wing virtue signaling, if you like, in my opinion. They talk a good talk, and they're obviously well-spoken and are clearly well-educated and whatever. But I don't really think that they really care about most people, working class people. It's just something that it makes them look like that they are on the side, that they're on the good side, that they're on the side of the decent majority. I hear that all the time as well, don't you? And that doesn't mean that I'm not saying that they're bad people or anything, but I just don't trust them. I don't trust them. And I think there's just a lot of that. The only real platform I think that I have any real faith in is the new culture form. And even then I have my doubts, if I'm being honest with you. I think there's very few people I believe that really truly have really genuinely want these towns and cities to get on and do well and become prosperous again, and for people to have hope and belief in themselves and their towns and cities again. Very, very few people. Without the kind of attitudes that I've been talking about throughout this video. So anyway, I'm sorry that I've been going on waffling on here for over an hour and a half now. I hope I've, as best as I could, trying to make myself clear about, why I think that this stuff is important and why I think that we've ended up here. I'm not a scholar. I'm not really an educated man in any real meaningful sense. And I don't have, I don't work with data or statistics and things like that. This is just, most of my videos are just my perspectives, just my opinions, based on observations and based on things that we know are actually true anyway. So just bear that in mind. I'm not some scholarly figure on anything. These are just purely just my sort of just summaries, overviews of issues that I see and things that I want to talk about. And I hope it resonates with some of you. So anyway, I'm going to call it there. Thank you very much for listening to this one. I'm sorry it's a long one, and a couple of the last videos have been quite long. But sometimes it's important to kind of cover as much as I can. So anyway, thank you very much for watching and listening, and I will catch you on the next one. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.